Welcome to another video from All Saints, all about the liturgy that we use here at Ye Olde Parish Church, a bit of an introduction to what we do, why we do it, and to think about what we do when we do it. So if you're interested in this kind of thing, check out the Lent video that I did a few weeks ago. It's also posted here on our YouTube channel, and there's a link to it from our website. But today, in this little video, I want to set the scene and explore the beginnings of the liturgy of Holy Week. I'm joined today by the Revd Dr Tom Wilson, and I'll say a little bit more about him in just a moment. But to give you the context of this is all of the services that are the run-up to Easter Sunday. So some of the earliest celebrations in the life of the church was indeed the Easter mystery, the Paschal mystery. Easter was celebrated, or the resurrection was celebrated, long before Christmas was, because if you think about it, that kind of makes sense, because the big thing about Christianity is the resurrection of Jesus. That is our unique selling point, if you like. So our faith hangs around the events of that Easter morning. So the celebration of that was from very, very early on in the life of the church. And to kind of help Christians, to help people enter into that, liturgies developed. And by liturgy, I mean words, music, silence, drama, light, darkness, the full kind of dramatic experience that you can perhaps have in worship. And liturgies that help us journey with Christ from the Last Supper to the arrest, to the abandonment, to the cross, and then, of course, on to the empty tomb and the resurrection. But right at the start of Holy Week, we begin with Palm Sunday. And Palm Sunday acts as a little bit of a prequel to what's going to happen through the week. So Palm Sunday, you're probably thinking donkey. We don't have a donkey. I'm really hoping one year we get a donkey, but we don't have one yet. But we do start outside on the parish green, and we will bless palm crosses, and we remember the triumphal entry into Jerusalem. So that's the first part of the service. But the second part of the service, which does take place then back in the church building, is we have a long extended reading. It's called the Passion Narrative. So each of the Gospels has an account of what happened to Jesus in terms of his betrayal, his arrest, the trial, the crucifixion, and his burial in the tomb. And it's called the Passion Narrative. And each year on Palm Sunday, we hear from one of the Gospels, or one of the synoptic Gospels. So this year we're in the Gospel of Matthew. And I always encourage people to experience it. If you've never experienced it before, it's really, really powerful. And it's a really powerful way to enter into Holy Week and to prepare for Easter. Because crucially, we don't end with the resurrection. All right. So we all know the happy ending bit. But Palm Sunday is an invitation, as we kind of engage with that passion narrative, to not rush ahead and just to be with the disciples as they encounter the horror of the death and the burial of their friend Jesus. So we do that. So it's a very powerful thing to do. And I always think it's an invitation to really think about my own part in the death of Jesus, to think about the sins of the world. And, we all join in as a congregation. There'll be moments, when we're all saying crucify, crucify, and so on. However, one of the things I've been really challenged about over a number of years, but quite recently, my thinking has been sharpened by my friend and colleague here today, is to really think about how those words that we will say and hear on Palm Sunday have been used, and indeed continue to be used, to persecute our Jewish neighbours. I think I'm going to pause there, because actually Tom knows much more than me about these things anyway, and that's why he's here. So let me sort of go back and reintroduce Tom properly. So my guest today is the Revd Dr Tom Wilson. He is the director of the St Philip Centre. He's also the interfaith advisor to the Bishop of Leicester. And as part of Tom's work and his area of interest, he's recently done some academic research, which he has published into a book. Tom, you can now show this, although I don't know whether with the recording, you might just want to say something in case the recording.
Yeah, so the book's called His Blood Be Upon Us, Completion and Condemnation in Matthew's Gospel. As Wendy said, it's an academic hardback, which comes with academic hardback prices. I'm really not here to sell it to you. I'm here to tell you what's inside it, so you don't have to buy it.
I think that's so nice. Although I do think, Tom, you should publish, the layman's version, the cheap, the Grove booklet version that we can all then buy on our budgets. But when Tom did this research, he shared it with different people to kind of make us really think about something that comes through in the gospel text that's called the blood libel. Tom, why did you research this? Why did you even begin to think, I know what I'm going to do? I'm going to write a book about this? Where does this come from?
So there's two reasons. One of them is, as you say, this cry, this blood cry that's Matthew 27:25 that you'll hear as part of the Passion reading on Palm Sunday, where all the Jewish people cry, his blood be upon us and upon our children. That's in response to Pilate's washing his hands and saying, I'm not responsible for this man, I'm innocent of this man's blood. And then the crowd around say, his blood be upon us and upon our children. And down the ages, it seems to me that that misuse of that text has allowed people to accuse, the Jews of killing Jesus, all Jewish people of all time of killing Jesus. And we might think that's ancient history, but it really isn't. It's still around today as a challenge and a problem that we need to face up to. In the book, I reflect on seeing a photo of a pro-Palestinian demonstration that was held in, I think it was 2020, with somebody holding a placard showing Jesus on the cross with the sign, the writing next to it, don't let them do it again. And the question, of course, is who's them? Is that Israeli Jews? Is that Jewish people? Like who? Nobody's killing Jesus again, are they? So, where did that thinking come from? And as I read a bit more about it, I was been greatly influenced by an American Jewish scholar of the New Testament who's called Amy Jill Levine. And she tells the story of how when she was 7, she got on the bus to go to school with one of her friends, and her friend accused her of deicide, that is, of killing God. So the friend on the school bus says, you killed our Lord. And Amy Jill Levine replies, no, I didn't. Deicide is the kind of thing you'd remember doing. Nobody, does that by mistake. Yes, you did, the friend insisted. Our priest said so. And it turns out, from thinking it through, what probably happened to this little girl was her priest had told her that the Jews were responsible for the death of Jesus. And since Amy was the only Jew that this young girl knew, she assumed, well, clearly Amy must have killed God, which is not true. And equally, I was on a webinar not dissimilar to this a couple of weeks ago and heard a rabbi talking about how when she grew up in a part of England in the 1980s, a similar blood libel charge circulated in her village in the run-up to Passover. An accusation that Jewish people wanted to find a child to kill to drain that child's blood to make matzah for Passover, which is an utter load of complete nonsense. But the fact that that was passed around in England in the 1980s makes me realize that this really still is a current problem that we need to do something about.
I remember hearing you talk about this just a few weeks ago at the book launch, and I was shocked again because it's so recent. You sort of think, I sometimes feel like with bad things that the church has done, it's quite helpful to think about them in the past, because then I can exonerate myself. It might be helpful because some people might not even know about the things that have happened in the past. Is there any way, could you just very briefly, I know even in the county of Leicestershire and in Leicester itself, the history of Jews being driven out. Do you want to just touch very briefly on any of that?
So very briefly, so the blood libel is this idea that Jewish people kill a child to drain their blood to make matzah for Passover. And I think that the kind of ground that allowed that lie to develop was this idea that when all the Jewish people said, his blood be upon us, as is written in Matthew's Gospel, the church erroneously taught that meant all Jewish people for all time. And so, the two things were linked in people's minds very easily. And there was a monk called Thomas of Monmouth who was in Norwich Cathedral in, I think it was the 12th century, but whenever it was, a Jewish man was again, Jewish people in Norwich were accused of killing William of Norwich by Thomas of Monmouth. He kind of invented this big load of mythology about what had happened. And that idea got currency and started to spread, and it spread throughout Europe and became one of the bases for the pogroms that we probably all know about happened in different parts of the world, but particularly in Central and Eastern Europe.
Yeah, I'm always struck by these things about the parallels with the modern time, and the big thing that underlies all of this is fear, isn't it? And whenever a government wants to stir up the masses, we have to have someone to blame. And throughout our history, our European history, the Jews have been the people that have been blamed on numerous occasions and in different contexts. And it's an uncomfortable feeling as a Christian to come to terms with the notion that the Bible that I hold dear, the faith that I hold dear, has been, well, I guess from the way you describe it, has been the cause.
I think I would say misinterpretation of the text by people who want to cling on to power has been the cause. I wouldn't say it's the Bible itself. I think it's people's failure to understand or interpret it in a more helpful way.
Thank you. That's why you've written the book. That was a really pithy way. A misinterpretation of the text by people who want to hold on to power. Yeah. And I wonder if that resonates in different ways as well, in different situations.
There's lots of different contemporary parallels.
Yeah. So, I mean, we've been, we follow the lectionary at All Saints then over the last few weeks, because it's the year of Matthew. When it's the year of Matthew, on the Sundays in Lent, you get a lot of John's Gospel. And I've been aware, even as we've gone through the Sundays leading up to where we are now in the church year, John's Gospel does use the phrase, the Jews, the Jews, the Jews. And again, as a preacher, you try and sort of put that in a context. And I know when I hear it, I don't hear all Jews. I hear the people who are contemporaries of Jesus. But is that kind of, could you say that John's Gospel is anti-Semitic? And I hear that sometimes. And what are we to do with that?
Well, you can't say he's anti-Semitic because that would be an anachronism. You can say he's having an argument with Jewish people about who Jesus is, and he's being quite polemical in that, arguing in the style of the time. There's a massive academic debate that I won't bore you with about what translation to use for that word, the Jews. I think you're probably right sticking with it and being uncomfortable, because the text is uncomfortable, and trying to, massage it away is not being true to what the text says. I think we have to be really careful about how it's interpreted. And as you say, make it very clear that this is part of an argument in that time, in that place, and it applies then, and you cannot extrapolate it to all Jewish people for all time. Because obviously the most chilling thing about John's Gospel, is that John 8:44, where Jesus talks about, to the Jews, and says, "You're of your father the devil," that was, grist to the mill of the Nazis, and they used it quite a lot in their preparations for the final solution. And
that's a horrible thing to face, actually, as a Christian. And I think, but we have to. Which kind of leads me to the other question I wanted to ask you about, because on one level, when I was first trying to understand this, and then I'm like, oh my goodness, like, well, we just can't do this, So one approach is, let's just leave the bits out of the Bible that are uncomfortable, which means you have a lot of holes, actually. If you
that's most of it, isn't it?
Well, yeah. But the other thing to say, well, it shouldn't be performed in public liturgy. So obviously on Palm Sunday, we will, and the whole text, it runs right through from Matthew 24, I think, Matthew 24. Or where do we start? We start when Jesus gets arrested.
26 somewhere.
Yeah, something like that.
Was it?
I can't remember. I've lost my place. Matthew 26, verse 14. Then one of the 12, who was called Judas Iscariot, went to the chief priest. So we start with Jesus's arrest, and it goes all the way through to the end of Matthew 27. So one answer is to say, well, because this text is so, could be used in the wrong way, could be heard in the wrong way, we should just not do it. We should edit that bit out. What would you say?
I'd say don't do that. And I've never heard a Jewish person say edit it out, because they wouldn't presume to tell someone else how to practice their faith. I think what I would want to happen, and what I think they would want to happen, is for people to be aware of where the challenges are, and to make sure they're helped to interpret and understand the context and the history of the passage. And you can do some of that at the moment in the service, but obviously you're not going to pause your liturgy halfway through and say, just, let's have a pause here now, and you can have a 15-minute explanation. But, making videos like this, writing something for the notice sheet, encouraging people to read. There's some very accessible, much cheaper to buy books than the one I've written, and allowing people to be educated appropriate to their stage of faith and growth as well. Because again, when you're teaching the story maybe to somebody who's new to the Christian faith, you'll just help them read it as it is, and then as they grow and mature in their discipleship, that's when you introduce the complexity.
Yeah, that is really helpful, because I do think it's a very powerful part of Holy Week, and to position ourselves in the Passion narrative. So I guess one of the ways that I get at it is, I never think it's about others. Either Pilate or the Jews of the time, it's where am I in this, and the complicity that I have in the sin of the world. And I think there's something powerful about, and I think one of the reasons the liturgy works a little bit is we all start outside with a crowd shouting, Hosanna, Jesus is great. And then we all also then become this crowd who cry, crucify, and abandon Jesus as he goes to the cross and to the tomb. And I think there's something quite powerful about that. So if you were if you were with us on Palm Sunday at All Saints, Tom, which, you know, if you need to come and preach for us again, we need to get a date in the diary when we finish doing this video. But if you were at a service where this liturgy is being performed, what do you kind of on a personal level, as a Christian, as a priest, and as someone involved in interfaith work, actually, how does this, where do you go in your heart and mind during this kind of liturgy?
I think you're right. You take it down into yourself, into your own relationship with God and your own complicity in the sin of the world and your own brokenness. I mean, for me, I think one of the most powerful interfaith service experiences I ever had was I was in a chapel on a residential that was for Jews, Christians, and Muslims, and we were all invited to go and listen to Evensong. And it was a bit, I can't remember which bit, but it was a bit of Paul where he was talking about the Jews in not entirely friendly terms. And I was sitting with a Jewish person on either side of me thinking, gosh, dinner's going to be fun, isn't it? But they were just mainly curious about what was going on and why did it say that and what did I think. They didn't receive that as an attack on them because it was in the context of a service of worship they've been invited to, and then they had the opportunity to question and talk. So I think having some space recognition somehow somewhere in a service, whether that's, I mean, on a service like Palm Sunday, that's probably more likely to be in the notice sheet than in something you say, but acknowledging this could be challenging or difficult for some people would be part of what I would want to do. And then what I'd want to do personally is, as you say, to direct the challenge inward and think about my own complicity in the failures and brokenness of the world.
Thank you. That is a wonderful whistle stop, crystal clear reflection on how we might approach this. What we will do when we post this video, I'll try and put in the comment below or perhaps in the website article any suggestions of books that Tom does have. We'll still put a link to Tom's research and to his big expensive book for you academic types, but perhaps Tom, you might share with me anything that I can kind of direct people to sort of think more deeply about these things. But if I might just wrap up by sort of reminding everyone, certainly this year our service starts at 10:30, which is 15 minutes earlier than the normal start time, and we'll be outside on the parish green, pretty much whatever the weather. If the weather's horrendous, there might be a plan B, but come assuming we're going to start outside. And then, Palm Gospel into church, Passion narrative, and we enter the drama of Holy Week. So do check out the other videos that will be posted shortly about the rest of the liturgy of Holy Week, as we journey from the place of abandonment, the place of the cross, through the despair of Holy Saturday onto the joy of Easter morning. Thanks for watching.